Hi, everyone. Franz and I are back here, and we are with Regan Yan of Data Alchemy and Jonathan Moran of SAS. We're going to be diving into, wow, all the adventures of zero, first, second party data. Before we dive in, Regan, you want to start? Give folks a bit of an introduction for your background?
Sure. Hi, I'm Regan Yan. I'm the CEO of Digital Alchemy. So we're a specialist Martech marketing automation consultancy. We work with lots of brands implementing and managing marketing automation, and I think that's probably one of the key differences between us and lots of other folk. We actually stick around and work with our clients on an ongoing basis to operate their marketing automation platforms. As we say, we eat our own dog food.
Excellent. Jonathan.
Yes. Hi, everyone. First off, to Scott and Franz, thank you so much for having us today. Excited to be speaking with you guys about all things data. So I work at an organization by the name of SAS, which is a data management and analytics provider. I'm the head of Martech Solutions Marketing there. Within our Martech line of business, we sell our CDP and journey orchestration and activation capabilities to brands around the globe. I've been in Martech for about 25 years, working through a variety of data and application companies, working with them. So I haven't always been the marketing guy. I've done development, installs, business consulting, and that sort of thing. So really spanning all angles of Martech. I live in Raleigh with my wife and two kids. So again, happy to be here today.
Welcome back as our returning champion. We're so happy to do another one of these with you.
Absolutely.
So great. And maybe start with a little provocative question. You just mentioned all things data versus being in Martech all your life. Same here, same with Scott and Regan. But have we spoken too much about technology stacks and too little about data architecture, operations, and data supply chain? What do you think?
Absolutely, we have. We do at DA. We do three things: we fix marketing automation implementations, we scale them, and we build new ones. Most of the work we do is fixing existing implementations. There's far too much focus on which platform you're using, and not enough focus on, am I actually feeding that platform with the right data? And what I always say is there's a lot more marketing automation implementations in the world than there is actually marketing automation. And every week when I'm talking to prospects and folks in the industry, every day that I have those conversations, I'm talking to people who have just implemented a new platform, and the problems are nearly always the same. And it's always the same. There's never been enough focus on building the data layer to support automation.
Yeah, I would certainly echo what Regan's saying, right? Getting the data right is always job one. And I think that we would all agree, right? The data is commonly an afterthought, but it's so important to get right up front. And I think hopefully we're going to talk a little bit about how to get it right up front.
All right, let's dive in on that. So as brands are pivoting to engaging more zero party, first party, second party data, a lot of parties here. What are the hurdles that they're facing in actually turning these strategies into reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had only one hurdle, but there's actually a number of hurdles, right? So I'll just list out five or six really quickly. Data design, right? The very beginning of the process. How do you design the data and the systems around the data properly? Data collection would be the second one. How do you collect the right data from the right places? And can you do it efficiently and even in an automated process? Data normalization, right? Or the organization of data, which includes data quality, identity management, resolution, those sorts of things. And once you normalize it, the fourth thing, data transformation, enriching data and preparing it for downstream use cases, such as predictive analytics or pattern detection, behavior signaling, that sort of thing. Then once you transform it, how do you create audiences to actually engage, right? This is integrating normalized and transformed data to create those audiences for customer engagement. And then finally, once the audiences are created, you've got to do something with those audiences. Audiences are essentially a grouping of data, right? And so how do you activate those audiences over a variety of channels? How do you get that right? And how do you get all of those things? Those are probably the main six or so challenges that I would see.
Yeah, what I've seen is that there's over the last sort of say 5 or 6 years, there's not been a lot of focus on first, third, and first and second party data. It's using third-party data has been super easy. It's super easy to access third-party data and in the digital world, but it's made us lazy, and it's made our marketing less specific to our customers, right? So the way I describe this is third-party data is like having a Tinder profile. It's specific and it's mostly accurate about who you are, but it's also the same information that everybody has about your customer, right? So if everybody's using third-party data, everybody's using the Tinder profile, right? Everybody's using the public profile of somebody, which is some reflection of who they are, but it's never exactly who they are. But if you get into first-party data and you really understand who your customer is from a one-on-one interaction, then it's like going on a date with somebody. You're having a one-on-one interaction. And you can only build an emotional connection with your customer when you have that interaction. I think first-party data is absolutely hands down the most important data an organization will ever have, because it describes and allows us to build emotional connections. But it's really difficult to put together. And it's why most organizations tend to focus on third-party data, and marketers prefer third-party data because they can use third-party data and they don't have to do with their IT department. But, it's absolutely 100% worth it, because that's where the ability to create an emotional connection with your customer comes from.
Tinder metaphor is going to stick in my head here for a while.
Yes, I'm feeling romantic now. Talking about first-party data, one of the first areas that we look into is normally digital. And there's a lot more than just digital. There's physical channels, offline channels. Is it worthwhile to tap into those? And how hard is it to access those data sources?
It's difficult. It's difficult because the way that digital data is created has all occurred in the last 10 years. 10 or maybe 15 years. All of those systems are designed, and when they were designed, when the online digital systems were designed, people were thinking about marketing, right? But when your banking system was designed, when your telco system was designed, when your POS system was designed, in many cases, some of those systems are 30 or 40 years old. They weren't thinking about customers. They were thinking about transaction processing. Even connecting transactions to customers in a reliable way is difficult sometimes. Connecting personal loan systems to credit card systems to mortgage systems, connecting the POS system to the loyalty system to the CRM, is very often that those integrations just don't occur. And the systems weren't designed to be integrated, and they weren't designed to think about the customer. And they were certainly not designed around marketing or a marketing purpose. So it is actually really difficult. And I think a lot of organizations over the last sort of 5 years or so have fooled themselves into thinking that the digital world is everything. And a lot of the platforms only focus on the digital data. And so people operate in the digital world and they think that everything is fine. But 90% of what actually goes on with your customer is actually occurring in all of those sort of homogeny of systems. And putting them together is difficult. What we see is that people implement marketing automation and then they use it for a little while, and then they go, but I need to access all of this other data, or I need to access, and then they have to go back and they have to re-implement something like a CDP to actually try to bring all of that data together.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think if you can't access and leverage and stitch together the proper data, then your marketing operations are going to suffer, right? I think there's a recent metric in the State of Martech report where LXA found that 75% of brands agree that data is the foundational layer that underpins the effectiveness of their stack. And the data stack is shifting its focus to facilitating collection and processing and activation of zero and first party data over, of course, third party data. I think that's why we're seeing the prevalence of so many CDP vendors, right? Everybody's got a CDP. But collection and integration and access challenges will always be present where there's a need to centralize and unify the zero and first party data, and some degree second party data across various solutions in a stack, right? So what are the common challenges we hear from our customers? Access. Can't get to the data I want, right? I can't get to unstructured data such as IoT streaming device data. As a marketer, I can't get that from the other parts of the organization. Granularity. When I do want to get to that data, it's not at the right level, right? It's not at that individual customer level. They only give me an aggregated kind of data dump. And then it's not Third, it's not updated in real time. It's just a batch-based job. CDPs, and yes, SAS has a CDP too, have been designed to solve this kind of eternal challenge. For some brands, they do, and we've heard of CDP failures as well. So for other brands, they don't. I think we'll get into why here in a minute.
Wow, there's so much here because I know some of our audience here is a little bit more technical on this too. I'd love to just dig a little bit deeper in some of those data challenges. One of them, I'd imagine, bringing all these different data sources together is normalization. Like, how do you transform that data in a way that it can be related to each other for actionable, more actionable insights or actions? Any thoughts, strategies on normalization, how people should think about that, do that well?
Yeah, so I can start. So I think if your data normalization challenges center around moving from unstructured data, IVR data, text data, streaming data, to structured data, or relate to joining anonymous data to known profiles or tables, there are several things that I would recommend, right? So, first and foremost, and this is going to sound very trite, but study your data, know your data dictionary. The best marketers that I have ever worked with, hands down, are the ones that have the best handle on the business data, right? And once that's done, I think you can then start investing in technologies and techniques that will aid you. For data pending, anonymous to known, stitching those together, it's leveraging strong identity management and resolution capabilities. Other analytical techniques can aid you in normalizing data for modeling or machine learning purposes, right? These include things like feature scaling and rescaling, encoding, parsing, or imputing. And for instances where you need to fill in missing values, and this is very common, right? Marketers and organizations looking at how they can fill in data gaps in order to either mitigate bias or do full feature modeling, then synthetic data generation is a great alternative.
The reason you normalize data is so that it's consistent, right? So that the date of birth is always in the same format, so that your account indicators are always right, and you don't have weird values in there. Because if you don't do that, you can't automate a campaign. Because every time you run the campaign, you're going to get a different result, or you're going to get a weird result. Normalizing data is super important from an automation perspective. If you don't normalize the data, if you don't create consistency in around the data, you can't automate. Right? But the thing that is also important around that data processing is denormalization, because a lot of the data that is coming out of our core and legacy systems is highly transactional. And if you want to run campaigns on, say, people who made a transaction in the last 30 days, then you don't want to go running through all of your transactions for the last 30 days and figure out who didn't make a transaction, because that could be a couple 100 million transactions. So denormalizing data and taking and summarizing transaction data into buckets and into summaries of last transaction, how many transactions, value of transactions, and things like that. Things that are commonly used in a marketing campaign design is really important, because it reduces the amount of work that you have to do in the campaign execution. But it also makes sure that people are using the same definition, right? And you'd be surprised how many different definitions people can come up with for last active date. And it's really, if you're running a bunch of campaigns of last active date and you've got 5 different analysts building campaigns with 5 different definitions of last active because they have a different view of what transaction means active, then that creates all sorts of weird results. Really, really understanding the data and understanding how that data is going to be used from a marketing perspective is super important.
I love that. We spoke about moving away a little bit more and more from third-party data into first-party data, but what about second-party data? Is that something we should merge into data frameworks, and how should we do that? And is it worthwhile? What do you think?
Yeah, zero and first party data are gold, right? But right behind that comes second party data. And the fact of the matter is, second party data can sometimes be a wild card because it takes so many different forms, right? Flat files, social profile data, survey data, so forth and so on. And it comes from a variety of different sources: voice of the customer platforms, data clean rooms, right, which are relatively new, ad sources, et cetera. And so I think this is where CDPs, or the concept of a CDP, come into play, right? The goal of CDPs is to handle a lot of the appending of second party data for you in an automated fashion. So that is to ingest and combine the data sources, prepare the data sources to some degree for predictive and prescriptive activities, prepare them for including in audiences based on a comprehensive customer view that sources zero and first party data, but in addition, second party data from different parts of the organization. And then channel activation, right? So your Martech stack, and particularly a CDP, should provide the capabilities to activate and personalize interactions in a simultaneous manner across channels, right? A CDP underneath and some sort of marketing automation platform on top. And so often what we see is if you have a closed or a standalone CDP, data isn't always shared between applications in your stack that need the data. And those applications aren't all what I like to call contextually aware of what's going on as a result of that. One thing I would add here, just wrapping up, is leveraging second party data doesn't always mean moving the data into a CDP that resides in your marketing cloud. There are vendors, SAS is an example, that take what's called a hybrid data approach, which means there's no lift and shift of data that's required. It can be leveraged for all of these activities without the time, cost, and risk associated with data duplication and movement. So I mentioned that because for brands that may be listening to this and may be considering how they use second party data, there is a way to use it without having to do all the ingestion and normalization and transformation and all of those things if they take a bit of a hybrid approach.
Cool. Very cool. Wow, I mean, so many things we could dive in here. We've talked about a number of challenges and ways in which people can address them. But love your thoughts on earlier in the process. Like you mentioned this near the beginning about the importance of design. Maybe just even as one dimension of this, could you discuss the importance of the automating data processes for campaign efficiency? Like, how do they think about designing a data strategy with automation and future scalability in mind?
I think the key to that is actually thinking about automation from the inception. Actually thinking about when you're designing the data that somebody's going to build a campaign that I haven't met yet, that hasn't even thought about that campaign yet, but somebody's going to build a campaign that is going to use this data to execute a campaign on a daily or a weekly or an hourly basis. And I think that idea of designing the data for automation is really important, because what's really important in automation is consistency. The data has to be presented to the platform in exactly the same way, in exactly the same format, in exactly the same timings every time, right? If you don't, then you can't automate a campaign because there's inconsistency in the way that data is presented to the platform. And you need to be able to check whether that data is consistent. So if you're loading up a file and you expect 1,000 records in that file, but there's 100,000 records in that file, then you need to be able to warn all the campaigns that are going to execute off that file that there's probably something wrong with that file. Or if you see values, if your normalization processes see values that they haven't seen before, then you need to flag that so that somebody can have a look at that. And the way we design this is to think about the Toyota factory. So in the Toyota factory, if there's a problem on the production line, the whole production line stops. They fix the problem and then the production line starts again. And so when we're designing these processes, we have a set of checks and balances as we're loading data. And some of those, if those criteria are not met, we stop the campaign schedule until we can resolve it.
So do you have other examples?
Around automation, I think the other one is around this consistency of definition of data, making sure that the date of birth or the age that people are using is the same, because very often in legacy systems, each system's got a different date of birth. And I've seen systems where half of the population was born in 1983. Why? Because that's when they did a migration, and the previous system didn't have a date of birth, so they just put the default date of when the system was built. Understanding the data and making sure that the downstream processes can operate 100% consistently. Have checks and balances on that. So don't build a campaign or build a process and think that it's never going to change, because it does. Because stuff happens to the upstream processes all the time.
And in our preparations, I really like what you were talking about. Different types of data you should touch, you shouldn't touch, color coding. Can you elaborate on that?
One of the things about marketers is that marketers often don't have access to 100% of the data. They've got access to maybe 30 or 40% of the data. And there's all this data that they wander around the organization and they find that it's new, right? But that data has very rarely been created for marketing. And so it can give you some interesting results. So what we do is we put in a process where we score the data and we use traffic lights. So if it's green data, this data has been used in marketing before, we know it's reliable, you can automate off it, it always looks and feels as it should. And you can build a campaign and automate that campaign straight away. And then we have orange data that's used in lots of campaigns, but sometimes we're not 100% sure that it's always right. We have a process where you run the campaign 3 times, you execute the campaign 3 times if you're using any orange data. If it runs 3 times consistently, then you can put it into the automation schedule. And then you have red data. And red data is something that we've never built a campaign on. It's supposed to be the transaction date. It's supposed to be a new product code, but it might not be. And you can still build a campaign on that, but you don't automate it. You run it manually, you check the data, you check the outcome, and you do that until it's consistent. Because you may have to go back to the system owner and say, hey, what does this actually mean? What does it mean when I get this code? What does it mean? What do I do when I get this strange piece of data? And if you do that, then it means that you don't have the same QA process for every single campaign. Because QA can take a long time, right? If you're using consistent data, you have a minimal QA process. But if you're using this data that nobody's ever used in marketing before, you're really rigorous around your quality checks around the execution.
There's so much here. We could spend hours with you, I'm sure, plumbing the depths on this. I know we're running short on time, and I did want to just get one last question in because, of course, it has to be the AI question of how do you see anticipated developments in AI over this next year changing the data landscape for marketers? And you got about a minute each.
All right. So I'll start by categorizing AI into 2 big buckets, Scott. You've got Gen AI and every other type of AI, right? At least that's how the market sees it. But from my point of view, Gen AI is not the only AI, right? So from a Gen AI point of view, it will create more data, right? Some of which will be biased and unreliable. And this is where what I call automation and approval will need to work flawlessly. Once organizations create Gen AI content in an automated fashion, approval guardrails will need to be bulletproof to keep bad content from reaching audiences. From a traditional AI point of view, as more organizations start to use AI for front-end CX applications, visual and voice recognition, based chatbots, IVRs, point of sale terminals and kiosks, those sorts of things, AI will become more and more automated as well. And as with anything that's automated, these low-level customer service tasks need to be monitored and well-governed. So I predict that we will see an even heightened increase in the importance around data governance and compliance, especially with the EU AI Act coming into play. AI on the back end, I think, will start using more technologies like we mentioned earlier, synthetic data generation, to remain truthful, responsible, and bias-free. So that's what I would think. Regan?
I think there's a lot of talk about generative AI, and I think it's going to transform the way we access data, because it will enable non-technical people to query and access data that they haven't been able to access before by basically asking a question and have that transformed into a query. What worries me about AI is that we know that a lot of the data that is in the systems is unreliable for all sorts of reasons, which is why we do all of this data quality work. And so what worries me is that by making it much easier for people to access the data without actually understanding the data, some of these AI processes could throw up some really strange results. And sometimes it would be very difficult for us to be able to tell a good result from a bad result. And so what worries me with AI is that people are going to take their eye off the ball in terms of the underlying quality of the data. And they're going to rely on AI algorithms to just answer a question without really understanding whether the answer to the question is right or not.
Makes a ton of sense. Listen, Regan, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us for this. Highly educational. I learned a ton of this from this. I know our listeners have too. Thank you. Thank you for doing this with us. And yeah, here's to a better year of better data practices in marketing automation. Perhaps less marketing automation implementation, more actual marketing automation. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.